Ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea? I'll sail the world.
Hey there, Mr. Starcheski. How are you tonight, my friend? You know we're coming to you live from Unlock the Middle, where we explore everything about the middle level learner. And tonight we are not going to disappoint because we have a locked and loaded panel ready to dig in. I'm Dean Packard. I am your co-host. Alongside of me, I have Mr. Chris Starcheski, the principal of Dudley Middle School. Chris, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Dean. Thanks so much for kicking it off tonight. We got a great show ahead. We're going to be talking about social emotional learning and the middle level learner and ways that it connects to all facets of their own world and ours. You know, earlier today, Dean, I set out to just mow my lawn, and some tasks sometimes become way more complex than they're supposed to.
So what did you do? How did you dig through it? That's the case. And that's what we're going to look at today, because I had the same thing happen to me today.
Well, I went through a variety of emotions this morning. I went to go ahead and realized that the battery was dead on the tractor. So we went ahead and jumped it. Got it fired up after pushing it across the yard to the front where my car was parked. And then after about 25 minutes of mowing, I had to empty the bag. And then all of a sudden the engine stopped working. I was wondering what was going on. So guess what? 2.5 hours later, with a fuel pump, fuel line, and new fuel filter, I was able to get it fired up again. I've never changed one of those before on my own, and I learned something brand new today, Dean.
Well, I'm sure you got it done without an issue, and I guarantee you were able to regulate your emotions going through that. You know, unlike myself and my dishwater today that decided to break on me. I did figure it out, but guess what? That's what happens as we're adults. Today, we're going to focus on kids, and we're going to talk about how kids at the middle level can really regulate their feelings and be able to, number one, understand people and be able to make good decisions and really live within the confines of what they're doing. Such a hard task, but again, we're charged as instructional leaders and teachers to ensure that we embed this SEL learning into what we do every single day.
You know, sometimes people think of SEL as another acronym in the alphabet soup of education. And one of the keys to remember is it's really about building good connections, good relationships, and modeling and mentoring kids to be good people. And it's not something else. You know, when we're sitting in the math classrooms, I was a former math teacher. I was teaching SEL before SEL was a thing. I was talking with kids about their connections and their relationships. I was talking with kids about how to relate and be nice to one another. I was talking to kids about how to manage their time and be effective at being able to manipulate their schedules and provide themselves with an opportunity to reflect and be who they wanted to be. That's what SEL is all about. And it's not just something in addition to curriculum. It's what effective educators do when they're delivering curriculum.
But I think it's important to note that we as instructional leaders have got to find a way to help teachers understand how to embed it into their content and what they're teaching. Again, I was a teacher for a long time. You were a teacher for a long time. If you don't have that understanding that this is vitally important, because kids will never reach their apex of learning if they're not balanced at all levels, okay? And that's what this does. And if you can do this with equality across every content, good things will definitely happen. There's no doubt about it.
You're absolutely right. You know what? You know, we're not the ones who are going to be talking tonight about social emotional learning and how to make it happen in the classroom. We've got some amazing guests to bring in. First off, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Mr. Bill Chaplin. He's the current principal of Shepherd Hill Regional High School here in Dudley, Massachusetts. We're excited to work alongside him, and we're excited to have him. How are you tonight, Bill?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. You guys are rock stars for doing this. It's great. I've been watching every week, and I'm glad you finally invited me, and it's such an important topic.
Well, you know what you forgot to say, Chris? He is a vital part of our administrative team. He sits at the top of the pyramid, and we kind of feed up to him. So that's one of the reasons. And Bill, you're here tonight for another reason as well. You have a background in counseling and understanding of kids in that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, this is my second career. I've been an educational leader in education for about 15 years. 15 years before that, I still am a clinical social worker, LICSW, had a private practice, saw kids all the time and families and parents, as well as was the director of 2 really grassroots mental health centers and clinics. So all those lessons I learned at the beginning of my career, I apply every single day in education because they're so important. it's the same thing. It's about relationships you guys were talking about. And it one of the big things I've found is we also have to model, social emotional learning, but we have to model just taking a breath every once in a while. It's so important now with all the uncertainty out there. We have to be able to hit pause, because when I was in middle school and high school, the world was not fast paced like it is right now. It is a fast paced expressway world. And the skill that sometimes get lost at the middle level and the high school level, is really, we got to hit, and at the adult level, we have to pause and breathe.
I love that. You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you what, let's build upon that a little bit, Chris. Let's bring in our next guest as well.
So I don't see Mike in our waiting room anymore. Mr. Mike McManus, I think he might have dropped out, but we'll bring in Carl Strazzullo right now. Carl Strazzullo is a school psychologist at Dudley Middle School. He understands the middle level learner and has a heck of a great sense of humor. Carl, how are you tonight?
I'm very well. I'm glad to be here. Much like Bill, this is my second career. I spent the first 20 years working in outpatient, inpatient, and clinical settings and intensive home-based services for a long time. And when my kids got to middle school, I realized if I can't do for them, I really need to look at what I'm doing. And that's when it came clear to me that those connections, those relationships, the genuineness of being able to relate to people is at the core of what we're doing. Conflict is inherent because we're all different. And being able to respect those differences leads to more effective emotional integration and learning.
You said that absolutely perfectly, Carl. Like, you've been doing this for a number of years. You're absolutely spot on with your layout of your ideas with all of that. So that's very important. Chris, do you happen to see Mike? Is he back in the waiting room at this point in time?
You know what? I don't see Mike right now, but I'm sure that he'll be able to pop back in. He was a little laggy and with his connection a little while ago, so maybe we're experiencing a little difficulty with him logging on. So let's just jump on in and start talking a little SEL, gentlemen. So we're most curious to know a little bit about your perspective on how teachers and parents can best support students as they navigate and grow through the middle years, thinking about how they can foster positive relationships, address conflict in positive ways, and not look at things through rose-colored glasses all the time, but how can they be great people?
I think
Go ahead, Carl.
I think one of the things that comes to my mind is I saw a cartoon sketch from The Simpsons a long time ago, and I hope I can quote it correctly, when Homer Simpson was the principal of the school, and he said, "Welcome to parent-teacher conferences, share the blame." And the reality is kids, adolescents are raw. They're just learning how to ride this emotional bicycle, and they're going to fall. They're going to make mistakes. Punishment isn't necessarily the opportunity here that presents itself. It's how do we model, how do we connect, how do we genuinely say, hey, it's okay to make a mistake and screw up.
And that happens often. It really does. And you got to keep that in mind, because as we look at kids, we want to help them understand the end goal. And everybody, to get to the end goal, has different layers that they need to work through. It doesn't just automatically happen. And Bill, I know I didn't mean to cut you off there, but jump in with that one.
No, I mean, Carl is spot on there, because listen, the four of us, our life's work has been about working with kids and trying to make their life a little bit better. And how do we carve that journey in the path? And there are different paths. I started my career in a middle school, working with kids, and there is that intensity, of kids have to be perfect and they can't fall down. And adults fall down all the time. So part of the work is helping parents understand that. Again, going back to what I said about just taking a breath. It's going to be okay. I mean, every one of us can look back at middle school and high school and say, man, the stuff I worried about really didn't matter. It really didn't. But going through it, it was the most important thing. And like I said, it's a fast-paced world. So how do we help kids kind of value all their different strengths and value all of their, and helping them see that, because sometimes parents can get this way too. They can get problem saturated, and we have to help them have a vision of kind of being more solution focused, and that's crucial at every level.
Navigating, Bill, you said something very important that I think we got to expound upon a little bit. Navigating the moments. And that's where kids really struggle. They can't see beyond their fingertips when you think about that, because they're worried about the initial response of how others feel about them and how they feel about themselves. So we're going to backtrack for a second here. Mike, welcome back. And Chris, if you want to give Mike that proper introduction, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. Welcome back, Mike McManus. Michael is a counselor in the Charlton, Dudley area. He runs a counseling service that's geared to addressing young adolescents and adolescents as they navigate through the most challenging experiences that come their way. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mike.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure.
And so what we were just talking with Carl and Bill about when you got bumped out, we were talking a little bit about the idea of what it is that teachers and parents can do to help provide an atmosphere and a structure to students to feel safe to experience young adolescent development. What type of advice do you have for those parents and teachers out there?
So a lot of my work is primarily with parents, and what I say to parents all the time is that we have to know what is a realistic expectation of our kid. And I think adolescence is a perfect example of that. I think sometimes get caught up in what our neighbor's kid is doing or what we saw the kid on Facebook doing, and my kid should be doing that, and why aren't they doing that? And then, it creates a lot of bad feelings. So one of the things I say to parents all the time is, find a good chart. The internet has some really good ones. What is developmentally appropriate for your kid? What should you expect from that? And I think, Dean, what you're just saying in terms of not being able to see past the end of their fingers, absolutely true developmentally, right? Super frustrating as someone trying to get them to develop those skills. But it's a little less frustrating, I think, if we can remember, hey, that is their reality, right? When toddlers need to snack and rest and do everything that they need, we're really excited to do that for them, right? When a toddler eats all the food in the house, everyone's pumped. When a teen does, everyone's upset, right? And in reality, they're going through a very similar transition. So I like to sort of remember what's really going on for our kids. So I have good expectations for that.
Hey, Mike, if I might pick up on what you were saying, most of my work is with the middle school kids. So I see kids in the 5th through 8th grade. And one of the things I like to do is get to know every single kid and parent right from the get-go, right when they're dropping their kids off. So you can kind of make that connection, use some humor, connect with them, joke with the parents, because it's that first connection that creates the impression. Because if I'm having to call them without any prior knowledge, they're on the defensive. If they see me joking, genuinely connecting with their kids and them, suddenly it's a very different story. The other thing that I like to do is, go ahead.
How do you build upon that, Carl? That's the next step. Okay. Making that initial connection is huge. Building that trust, building that relationship, building that opportunity to grow is the next phase of all of this.
I call that's when the rubber hits the road. And it's different for everybody because you have to find your skill set in that regard. And it's very individualized. I use a lot of humor. I use a lot of figurative speech with the kids. And I do a lot of self-effacement in terms of, my own errors and my own mistakes. I'll walk into the 5th grade with a plush stuffed animal cow and say, have a cow. We all do. And when you do, come see me.
You know what? That's absolutely essential, is to balance that sense of humor with a realistic perspective on what it is that the child that's in front of you is capable of bringing to the table at that exact moment. This isn't about perfection, because if it was, it'd be a whole different conversation. We're in middle school, and middle school is a place where it's supposed to be safe to take risks, safe to fail, and then hit the reset button and get ready and fired up to move on into that next level. So let's talk a little bit and then transition just a minute, gentlemen, over into the idea of talking with young adolescents about difficult topics. We've had a past couple of months of some real tumultuous times in our world. Everything from COVID to the issues around racism and the issues around, the governmental perspective and Democrats versus Republicans. How can we effectively open channels of conversation and communication with our kids to allow them to feel safe at formulating their own opinions and their own ideas, as opposed to moms, dads, and the teachers?
And I'm going to take that one step further before I hand the baton to Bill. Let's talk about cultural differences. Let's talk about the ability to self-regulate one's own being, and as a result of being a student. So hard, super tough, and you've got to be really diligent as a teacher and instructional leader. So Bill, let's toss that one over to you, and let's talk about that, what that looks like.
Yeah, we, all five of us see a lot of this all the time. And the reality is, I just try to normalize it. Adults struggle navigating these things, these streets, and these topics. And we have to get better at modeling that for our students, obviously. But they're already seeing a ton of social media, around all the different areas. It could be from their parents as well. I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and when they were navigating these waters when they were younger, I always try to help them to go dig a little deeper, see all sides of whatever the issue is, and then come up with their own decision around it. And our job as educators and counselors and adults need to help them navigate that, because a lot of adults nowadays, they go with whatever the soundbite is, and the soundbite is hardly never ever what it really is. So I try to at high school and the middle school level, I try to help them dig a little deeper and just see what the both sides are, and then help them navigate to their own decision. That's
sage advice. Mike McManus, what do you think?
So the one thing I want to sort of repeat that I just heard that I think is probably paramount in all the conversations that we're talking about is that regulation is catchy, right? If I'm regulated while I'm trying to have a difficult conversation, the likelihood of the kid that I'm working with staying regulated is a lot higher, right? Everyone's held that screaming baby, and 5 minutes later, they're feeling the dysregulation from that baby, right? That's what I don't want happening to our kids when they're trying to ask these sort of difficult, sort of challenging questions. The other thing I think thank you. The other thing I think that is important, though, is that as adults, we have to be brave. And I think what I really mean is I think we sometimes have to be braver than we've been, meaning that we have to have the honest conversations, right? And, I do a lot of work in adoption, right? And a lot of folks will say to me, when is the right age to tell this kid they're adopted? And my answer is always the same. What do you mean they don't already know, right? But I know the reason why that doesn't happen is because people are afraid to have that conversation. And I think that, we have to encourage our kids to use the skills they have to figure out their own opinions. But to start them off, we have to be brave enough to say, we should probably have opinions about these things. You're young adults now. You're going to come across people. You're going to want to know how you feel. So let's figure that out together.
Good point. Great point, Carl.
There are two things I'd like to pick up on what Mike said, and that is, first off, kids know when you're genuinely listening. And most of the time, they want to be heard, and they want to see you stable and be able to listen and understand where they're coming from. So when kids are upset and they come storming into my office and they're blowing all kinds of swears and all kinds of venom, the first thing I say is, shut the door. Shut the door. Come on in and shut the door. Chris, you must hear it all the time coming out of my office in terms of that. And the other piece I wanted to pick up on terms of what Mike was saying is, I tell parents all the time, if you're not talking to your kid about sex, drugs, TikTok, and Instagram, you're letting the rest of the world give them an education you don't want.
Right.
So you gotta find a way to use humor, situations, displacement, anything you can to get your message out there in terms of your moral code and values.
Hey, excellent point as well, Carl. Let's just take it up one more notch if we can. Let's talk about how can we help teachers and parents be better at helping their children understand empathy and compassion. That is just something that we're all rushing as educators to get to the end line and teach all the content that we can teach. But we have to stop and make sure all these kids do understand what empathy is and what compassion is. Because if we do that, that's going to plant the seeds for the future for these kids to be successful in society. So, Bill, why don't you take that one? if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I listen. I love what Mike and Carl talked about in terms of being brave, and you have to be able to kind of take that step in terms of talking about these things. And it's the same for teachers and educators. Many teachers are afraid to broach subjects like this, and we have to kind of instill. I mean, one of the things we've learned from what we're going through the past 6 months is we have to be vulnerable again, as adults, and say we don't know the answer. Let's try to figure this out together. A lot of times, sometimes teachers and educators can get sucked into what other people think of what students who and are, or parents, and we have to kind of undo that a little bit in terms of kind of coming up with our own opinions. I mean, I've had plenty of students over the years, the decades, where teachers didn't know they were accomplished musicians, okay, or they were great athletes, or they were great craftsmen, and you never find it out if you don't ask, so it has to come from the source, has to come from us. But I think what Mike said earlier was about being brave. Teachers just have to be brave, and as educational leaders, we have to kind of somehow facilitate that, and move that along.
That's totally great advice as well. And as an instructional leader, I want to make sure that every teacher in my building understands they have that mulligan or two. You've got to make sure that you get out there and really get to know deeply these kids prior to the learning starting. I mean, it just won't happen to the level that we want if you don't do that. So, well said. Mike McManus, thoughts?
So I'm going to steal the book. I mean, I think a lot of people are talking about that. Dr. Brene Brown has been talking about it for years. I think that if we can maintain good boundaries while being able to demonstrate our own vulnerabilities, I think it goes quite a distance. Again, the boundaries are always huge, right? We don't want anything questionable going on, but being able to be vulnerable with our students and with our kids, I think is hugely important. Sometimes parents are like, well, no, he didn't answer the question. What can I do to make my kid more empathetic or passionate? I'm a huge fan of volunteering or volunteerism. And there's lots of opportunities to do that now safely. I mean, you can, paint rocks with positive messages on them and leave them around town. You never come into contact with anybody else and it costs you nothing, right? So I really like that. What activity can I point to in the last 6 months where I showed my kid that being a member of my community was important to me?
Mike, that's something that is absolutely essential, to young adolescent development. And it's something that Dudley Charlton, I think, does a phenomenal job at in terms of building, the student first. We're not always about reading, math, and arithmetic and writing and the academics. It's important, don't get me wrong, but identifying opportunities for our kids to develop in a safe way and experience compassion and understand empathy from the realistic experience is essential. Carl, what can you bring to the table here?
Well, Mike just mentioned one of my favorite people to take a look at, and that is Brene Brown. And if you go to YouTube and take a look at some of her videos, she does a wonderful job of replicating the difference between empathy, sympathy, and compassion. Those three things carry very different meanings. And she does a great job of demonstrating them in a very humorous and self-effacing manner that we can all relate to. And that's a very important skill set for people to learn.
Well, there's no doubt that all of you guys bring a nice level, a nice variety to the table today when we start talking about feelings for kids and self-regulation of their thoughts and getting them through the day. We greatly appreciate that. The million-dollar question is, what does the future hold? What does it look like? What do we have in front of us that we're going to be able to say, hey, we're going to make this world a better place because we're all entrusted in this game together? What does that look like to you, Bill?
I think it's already happening, and it's been happening for a while. We just don't focus on it. During the past 6 months, when we were in the spring at the high school, our class of 2020 lost so many things. But the other thing that I pointed out to them and their parents was many of them became essential workers. They were at the Overlook, they were at Market Basket, they were working every day, and those are the things we have to kind of focus on. We don't get, a lot of times we're a magnet to the negative, and we have to kind of change that a little bit. There's positive going around all of us. It just isn't loud enough, and part of us, the five of us in our lifelong work, we have to be a little louder and make that stuff loud. That sound bite on social media says we're not doing this, and they don't have any information about it, that's that magnet towards the negativity, and we have to kind of make the positive louder because it's going on all around us.
Great point. Mike, take it to the next level. What do you got?
So mine is going to be a little bit different. I'm just going to say, as soon as people start to breathe, the sky is the possibility. Really, I feel like we've been through a lot lately, but if we could just start to breathe. I'm always pushing meditation and yoga in my practice. That may be a hard sell for some of your viewers, but I just want people to start breathing so we can see what good stuff can happen.
I love it. I think you're spot on with that, and I think it's something we have to explore. Carl, take it away.
I think one of the things, and I just wanted to go back to the part about sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Most of our adults relate to kids in a sympathetic way. That turns kids off immediately. It's kind of like going through the grieving line at the funeral home, and someone shakes your hand and says, "I'm sorry," and moves on. It's like, you've got the problem, I don't, and I see it. And it's awful where you are. Empathy is the ability to just look them in the eye, connect, and not say anything and absorb some of that pain. Those are important things to be able to do. I think, as Mike was saying, meditation, yoga, those things help people de-escalate. They get the physiological response back under control. And that's difficult for kids because for them, they don't always have an emotional language. Sometimes emotions come up as a primordial ooze that just takes over their behavior and their body. And by helping them to regulate that, by modeling regulation, they're able to settle down and feel safe. With that, they now feel an empathic connection to you.
You know, the idea of self-regulation and being able to take yourself into that real experience that others are involved in is absolutely essential. You know, we have to keep our eyes on the prize. We can't show the kids that we don't get frustrated, that we don't get aggravated, that we have everything going on all the time. You know, last week was an extremely emotional week for me in my position as a principal at Dudley Middle School. And by the end of the week, I just needed to let some of that frustration go. And I let it go with some great colleagues. It was virtual in Zoom or in Meet or wherever the heck we were. But the whole point was my colleagues understood that this cool, calm, collected perspective that's there needed to let it out. And we got to give kids an opportunity to be able to do that and be able to just see us release when we need to release.
Without
important.
Yeah, without punishment for every little thing that goes wrong, because that's where the whole system has got to change. I mean, again, I get it when there's 25 kids in a class and you got to have some control, but the control can be a little bit released if your learning is happening and people can be themselves. And that's where it has to be able to let go. And we need to do a better job, all of us, with understanding that.
Hey, you know what, Dean? I want to take the opportunity. I'm looking at the time. Carl, go ahead. Last thought, and then we're going to wrap it up here tonight.
Okay, I think one of the things that's difficult for people to understand until you help them take a look at themselves and say, when was the last time you were anxious or angry? And how well was your brain open to learning? And if you can't help kids break that pattern, they're not going to learn.
True.
No, it comes down to the whole idea of Maslow and Bloom and the ideas of being able to have yourself well prepared emotionally, mentally, and physically in order to engage in that experience that's at your hands. You know, we got to acknowledge this in our kids. We got to acknowledge it in one another, and we've got to support every member of our learning community as we move forward. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're coming up on 30 minutes tonight. Bill Chaplin, principal at Shepherd Hill Regional High School. Carl Strazzullo, school psychologist at Dudley Middle School. Mike McManus, thanks for all of your work in the community with our kids and with our families. My partner, my friend, Dean Packard, great job hosting tonight.
Hey, I got one more thing I want to add. I think it's important. We talk a lot about teachers. We talk a lot about kids. We also need the community member to come around us as well. If we want to have a strong community, we all have to be talking the same lingo. We all got to be believing in what's important, and we got to be backing that up. And if we all do that together, our whole society becomes better, and we have a deeper understanding and a richer understanding. That's all I have. Hey, you three guys are rock stars tonight. We greatly appreciate your time and coming on. We gotta kind of cut this short because we've gone over our 20-minute limit. I think we could talk for an hour on this, Chris.
Have we really? Well, the time has gone by very quickly, but the points that we made tonight that we heard from Bill, Mike, and Carl, exceptionally important. I look forward to putting them into practice starting tomorrow morning again when we sit down and talk about the fall. Let's have a great night, gentlemen. Be well, be safe, be happy, and most of all, work hard to unlock that middle.
Take care.